So welcome to Camp GBAUUF. If you're not from the congregation, that's the term they use. It's a mouthful, but it trips off the tongue. Camp GBAUUF, or like I said, a retreat. You've already heard from the official sources, the Unitarian Universalist Association and the mission statement of the fellowship. So pretend now that I'm your greeter and I just want to give you a personal tour because I've experienced this camp many, many times, and I just kind of want to take you around the grounds and tell you what's going to happen. So the way I organize this little tour, I try to answer three questions that if I were you, I would probably be asking the same thing. So number one, you just heard about all these different values, and you've probably heard something about us that we have this very flexible belief system. So how does such a flexible and inclusive belief system really work? Because that's a puzzle. Number two, what's the story with this congregation? Kind of give me the scoop. And number three, why would I want to be a part of this after all? Because that's what you're here for, right? So let me start walking through them. How does this unusual belief system function? Well, over a decade ago, one of my early sermons, I think when I was in seminary, I had this idea of a Unitarian Universalist camp. And it was brought on by a trip I took to Zion National Park. And some of you have probably heard me do this sermon before years ago, but I'm resurrecting it for an introduction today. So Zion National Park, if you've been there, it's quite massive, and it's got a lot of mountains, they call them, but they're not really super high, tall mountains, but a lot of, once upon a time, I think they were mountains, and they've been worn down through, millennia, to the point now that they're kind of flat-topped, a lot of them. And that's why I like it as a metaphor, because often you think of religious pilgrims or evangelicals kind of climbing up the mountain of truth with a capital T and planting a flag on it, and it's the highest mountain in the area and that kind of thing, like Mount Everest. I like this, that they're all the same height. They're not really that, important looking. And so each one I thought of as a religious tradition, let's say, or a path we might explore. So in that sermon I said, well, there's probably the Buddhist mountain, and there's the Wiccan mountain, and there's the Jewish mountain, and the Christian mountain, the humanist mountain, the agnostic mountain, maybe the ethical spirituality mountain, whatever, what have you. And our job in this place is to just go hiking. And go hiking up these mountains and discover, search them, see if they find any meaning in these traditions. Most of us in this society have come out of a Christian background. So maybe we sit on a mountain that we're kind of comfortable with, the Christian mountain. We look over at the Buddhist mountain or the humanist mountain and say, well, with this lens, what do I think about that? And would that be meaningful to me? And you just try it out. And so that was my idea of how this kind of works, that we believe that all faith traditions come from a human experience, and they were helping us meaning humanity, understand the deep questions of what is the meaning of life? How do we orient ourselves in the universe? And each culture, each person came up there with their own answer for that. And that continues. We believe that that continues. And this park might be a metaphor in your head to try to think how that works. Well, of course, then where's the fellowship? It's the lodge in the valley of the park. And so you go to the lodge to get oriented. So somebody there is a guide and says, well, here, go to that mountain. Here's a pamphlet for it. Here's the map. And maybe you find somebody else that wants to go on that same journey with you. And you go together and you compare your experiences. And when you come back off the mountain, you come down into the fellowship and you share with each other in a small group or one-on-one over coffee, because every camp has coffee, right, and cake. So that was my idea, to try to explain how all of these traditions exist simultaneously. And of course, it's all held together by the values that we uphold in common and our covenant to be with each other. But that was an explanation that was very heady. It was very intellectual. It's like, okay, we have all these traditions. But I didn't say enough about, well, what's the community like down in this lodge, in this fellowship? So that's why I wanted to start with that today and then go into more of what's it like in the lodge. Which leads me to question number 2. What is GBAUUF, or the Green Bay Area Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, all about? Well, to do that, I asked around, because I've only been here since like 2016, and I don't know the history, and I hear stories, but it's kind of confusing to me. So I asked around and said, who are the experts who've been here for a long time? And everybody kept pointing to Janice Galt. So I asked Janice if she would meet me here, and it was supposed to be an hour. I think it was at least 2 hours. And we were talking all about this. So this all comes from my conversation with her. If you are a stickler for details, I will acknowledge right now that I won't have all of them right, and that's okay. But it's just the idea, the feel of what the history is here. First of all, I was surprised a couple years ago to find out that this is the second version of this fellowship. The first version started in the 1970s. And it was a very, very small group that met basically because they loved intellectual stimulation and talk about ethics and liberal religion and usually very, very liberal concepts. And that was common in the 1970s with a lot of the lay-led fellowships that started in this area, that they were more like speakers forums, but they just loved each other's company and what they got to talk about and do. And Janice said it was pretty cool. But it wasn't like today at all. I mean, there wasn't any music. The Good Times Band didn't even exist yet. It wasn't even a thought. There were no joys and concerns. It basically was just come together, and I assume they had coffee. How could you exist without coffee? But that's about all it was. And unfortunately, one of the founding members unexpectedly passed away, and like the chalice flame, it just kind of dwindled and kind of faded away. And then in the early 90s, 92, 93, I wasn't quite sure in my notes, this current version of the fellowship was founded. And Janice told me that Michael and Ramona were around then. Is that true? All right. With some other folks. Janice wasn't here right away. And she came in the spring of 1996. And she said at that time, we were using the dance space at the YWCA and kind of outgrew that and moved into the gym. But it was one of these things where I don't know if you had a closet even where you could put stuff away or you had to schlep it over there in the trunk of your car. But it's exhausting sometimes to like set it up, tear it down, set it up, tear it down, set it up, tear it down. And then September 11th happened in 2001. And I remember that day, obviously, we all do. We just went through the 2nd anniversary of it. What is it? 23rd? 23rd. I can't do math up here. I'm sorry. And I remember that because every quiet space, mostly houses of worship, opened their doors that night. And I was in Appleton and part of that fellowship, and they opened theirs. And it was a place where we could come together and just process what had happened during that day. It was very, very important. And Janice said this fellowship, because of the lease arrangements, couldn't do that night. And there was started a conversation about, well, maybe we should have a place where we could do that if we wanted to do that in the future. And so they ended up moving into a rented space in Ashwaubenon, Hyde Music, and had a nice time. And I think they moved around a few times. I didn't write it all down. But somewhere in that time, they did their first experiment with the consortium that we have today. This is a consortium of 3 congregations. Back then, they had a partnership with the congregation in Ripon to have a minister for a couple of years. So they tried that out way early on compared to what we have now. And then eventually they moved, they had a much more permanent space, much bigger, kind of if we build it, they will come kind of idea. In 2008, moved to a strip mall on Comanche Drive by the airport. And that really puzzled me when I first got involved with this congregation. It was post-Comanche Drive, and they would keep saying we were at Comanche. And I thought it was some sort of an Indian reservation, and I didn't realize that that was actually a name of a street. So that's confusing if you're a newcomer here and you hear the old-timers talk about that. But they were there, and Janice says there was a lot of celebration, a lot of circle gatherings, dinners, brunches, lunches, mostly a time of good expectations. And then in 2015, their lease came up, and they already had a lease that they could barely afford, and they were going to raise it significantly. So they decided that maybe they should be even more stable and looked around to find a building. And that's where this building came from. They looked all over the metro area. And it's kind of a leap of faith to go from suburban airport environment to inner city on the east side in an old drive-through bank, although I love this architecture. So that created a few more snafus. It took a while to move in because if you think about it, a drive-through bank has maybe 6 to 12 people in it all day long. Whereas, look at this, there's 30, 40, sometimes up to 60 people in here. So you have to have a much better ventilation system. So redoing that and getting that in place took a while. So for a whole year, they were at the Mothie Center at UW Green Bay. And I had just graduated from seminary and was looking for just things to fill my Sundays. And so first Sunday of the month, every month, I came to the Mothie Center. And that's when I got to know this wonderful congregation. And then so the fall of 2016 moved into this space. So that's kind of the logistics of how we got here. But the spirit of it, Janice talked a lot about the people here, and particularly one person, Betty McNulty, who is no longer with us, but said that she was such a loving spirit. And they were 22 years, she was 22 years older than Janice, and it felt sort of like a mothering, mentoring kind of spirit until 2015. So the whole place had this feeling of intelligence, a gift for friendship. Janice herself felt safe here. She could be herself, kind of be her aspirational self, open, loved, loving, giving. And here Janice, she said, could center herself on how she wants to be as a human being. And I think that was a wonderful statement to talk about the spirit that I've always found here as well. So my summary is it's a fellowship that's always trying to be centered in love. Founded with a love of intellectual stimulation, a love of community, with a strong ethical values not bounded by specific doctrine or belief system. And of course, much has changed over the decades, but the love, acceptance, encouragement of each other, and frankly, just celebration, you get the sense of that this morning in community, have remained constant over all that time. So my third question then, why would I want to be a part of all of this? So this is my practice of invitation, which is the theme this month. If I step back and try to get the big picture of it all, I think of the societal norms in the community that we live in here in Green Bay. Based on those societal norms, Unitarian Universalists are paradigm shifters. It's a term I borrowed from the senior minister at First Unitarian Dallas. Paradigm shifters, I think, fits who we are. So let me explain that a little bit. My invitation to you is to live authentically and center your life in love. Not in any particular doctrine or scripture or anything like that. It's as simple as that. Live your life authentically and center your life in love. I invite you to aspire to live in a sustainable world with equal opportunity for all to thrive. Now, okay, that's a big statement. I wrote down in my notes, this is my corporate world coming back to me. It's a BHAG, which stands for Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal. So think about that. I think everybody in the room would nod that we believe in equal opportunities for everyone to thrive. But back in our history, back in the 50s, maybe 60s, we were only talking about humans, and we didn't pay enough attention to the world within which we live. And so I think to rephrase that today, we want to live in a sustainable world and where everybody can thrive. It shouldn't be at the expense of one or the other. And that is a big, hairy, audacious goal. But that in our heart of hearts is, I think, what we stand for. So I would say come be a part of a community that's spiritual but not religious in the traditional sense of either of those terms, spiritual and religious. I'd say, and these are my opinions, I know everybody, that's a hallmark of Unitarian Universalism. Every single person has their own opinion, and that's cool. So my opinion, we believe in a greater power than ourselves, but we have a lot of trouble naming it. So I would offer the names of hope, optimism, love, and peace, because I think these are the values that we honor, that we lift up, and I would argue even worship, because to me worship, the word worship means to lift up and honor. So hope, optimism, love, and peace are these values. And if you think about deities that are out there that other religions kind of worship, those tend to be metaphors for these values. And so I don't think we're at odds with other religions. We just kind of get to the value part of it and skip the whole deity part, generally. Our beliefs are very strong, and they come from within and are lived outwardly, as opposed to not pushed down on us from without. Kind of importantly, and this took me a while to figure out when I first became a Unitarian Universalist, we're a people of this world, not the next. We don't really know what happens in the next, so we focus on this one, which is where I believe much of our spirituality then is grounded. We believe that we live in an amazing place and time, ripe with opportunities to create a utopic and sustainable world, if only humanity can evolve and embrace its better self and fully embrace interdependence of all the web of existence. So I think that's where all of our spirituality is grounded. We believe that this is an amazing place and time, ripe with opportunities to create a utopic and sustainable world. We're right on the cusp. If only humanity can evolve and embrace its better self and fully embrace the interdependent web of all existence. So I'm going to end like that covenant with the board did, with humility. We acknowledge that we are all very, very human and we make mistakes. But we are a covenantal community. That means we promise to hang in there together and strive to make things right when mistakes happen. The way I like to look at it is being in right relationship with those we love and share this fellowship is more important than being right. Or said more succinctly, being in right relationship is more important than being right. After all, it's what a bunch of folks striving to live love-centered lives would do. This is the kind of camp you are warmly invited to. And frankly, this message is my spiritual practice of invitation this month. Amen. Let's be quiet for a few minutes.